So friends, we have now the very last conversation and input of the summit, of this metabolism hackathon that we were putting on since Thursday, or since Wednesday rather, with ETH Global. So full week of learning, building, interacting, making friends, maybe enemies even. But this next speaker most certainly is not going to be your enemy unless you are an immoral, sentient AI, because Imane Bello, who I happen to have met on an event that Zora put on a few weeks ago in Paris at ETHCC, randomly got talking, and her expertise is quite relevant currently, and that is the field of AI ethics. Now, one would say, Mikhail, why would we talk about ethics in the context of engineering and technology building? But technology is not neutral. Technology is biased, technology is ideological, and technology can have moral and ethical implications. And giving these emergent new AI ecosystems, DALI being a really good example, or Pollinations.ai, a project that I really like, there's quite a lot to think and speak about. So that's exactly what's going to happen. There might be some Wi-Fi issues because Imane is on the road right now. So I do hope that she has a stable connection to you. If not, we might have to repeat it some other day. But please, I would like to give the stage to you, Imane. Welcome. Yes, now we can hear you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks to ETH Global, obviously, for organizing such a great event, as well as to Zora for putting all of this together. So as Michael was saying, the discussion today is going to be about AI ethics per se. We will focus on image generation models. And the question is, what lessons could be drawn from AI ethics for the future of the economy, which is, as you know, Web3. So I'm not going to discuss much about Web3 because I don't want to bore you. And I know you know that Web3 has this huge potential. It does represent a paradigm shift. And we've all heard the keywords surrounded around financial inclusion, governance, decentralization. So we all know Web3 does represent this new tool, this potential to use our collective imagination to design new digital spaces on chain tools. So how exactly do we build this future together? How exactly do we ensure that the expansion of the Web3 actually serves humanity at large? My key point here is in the title, and it is that AI ethics per se can be a tremendous asset to know what has been done before in the field that also is related to paradigm shifts, that is also related to doing things differently and potentially serving humankind at large. And that has thought of its ethical considerations, its consequences, its potential harms on individuals and groups, and that we can just use that in order to gain some time, in order to not repeat the same old mistakes, in order to get ahead to actually fulfill what we are, I think, all here for, which is the potential of Web3. So very briefly, we say that in AI ethics, there are two types of harms. And just so you know, before I deep dive into it, I will today with you, hopefully, focus on image generation models, notably, as Michael just mentioned, DALI. Because I think, those models do represent a paradigm shift as well, and they will be used in the Web3 to create images, to create landscapes, to create multimodal user experiences as well. So it's important to understand what they are what their potential consequences could be, and how exactly we go around them. So AI ethics in general, those represent, according to researcher Kate Crawford, two types of harms. Harm A, harms of allocation. Harm B, harms of representation. Harms of allocation are harms where people, affected persons, are not receiving, are not being allocated resources. So here you can think of not getting a loan, applying to get a loan at an institutional bank. See, here we go with financial inclusion, and being rejected based on either a decision that has been made by an AI system, or a decision that has been pushed for by an AI system and agreed upon by a human being. Either way, so those are harms of allocations. You are not being allocated a given resource. And then we have harms of representation, which I think here we will also deep dive into, because we will discuss image generation models. So we are discussing images, representations of society, structures of power as well. So harms of representation is when a given person or a given group are represented in a given manner. Either they're represented with indignity, or they are being stereotyped upon, etc. So here you can think of, well, we'll discuss harms of representation when we discuss the limitations of some AI models, notably image generation models. So if you haven't heard about them, if you haven't heard about image generation model, I'll give you some examples. So the first well-known image generation model that we know of is called GPT-3, well, GPT-2, but we'll discuss GPT-3. It's a system that uses language to instruct a large neural network to perform a variety of text generation tasks. So the input is a language, and the output here is also text generation. For DAL-E, we have DAL-E and DAL-E 2, which is the newest version of DAL-E. It's a system that was created by OpenAI, which simply needs a simple text description to generate an image. So here you can think of a chair that looks like an avocado. A chair that looks like an avocado. And then, so you input this simple text description to the system, and the output that you have is, well, an image of a chair that looks like an avocado. What the system does, DAL-E 2, it turns those simple text descriptions into, and this is very important, into realistic photos that have never existed before. A raccoon that dunks at basketball. So it turns text into realistic images that have never existed before. It can also realistically edit photos. So if someone wants to take a very important historical building that exists somewhere, and very realistically edit the photo and pretend that there is smoke behind this building, it is possible. So take a second to think of the potential consequences of what it could mean, solely in terms of misinformation, for instance, or of representations of reality as well, how people understand information, how people understand realities. So it can turn text into realistic photos, it can realistically edit existing photos, and it can also start with an image and create variations of that image based on the given image. So think here of The Kiss by Klimt. The input here is The Kiss by Gustav Klimt, And the outputs are variations of the kiss. So not the kiss, but variations of the kiss. Same colors, different positions. But when you see it, and if you're interested, you can absolutely take a look at those examples that I'm giving. Those are real examples of photos that are public. You can find them on the OpenAI website. If you simply Google DAO E2, OpenAI pictures. And I wish I could have done a PPT, but I'm in vacations and traveling, so I don't have my computer. So I'm just like, this is solely me and my words. But if you want to take a look at the pictures, you absolutely can, and they're very easily found, to be found online. So just to sum up, and then we'll deep dive into the limitations and what we can learn from them for the Web3. You have an image generation model that can turn language into realistic picture that have never existed before, edit realistically existing pictures, and take pictures and just like do variations out of that one given picture. In terms of art, in terms of landscape creation, like for instance for the metaverse, it could have tremendous applications, and we'll discuss the Web3 applications of image generation models. But right here, I do want you to take a second to think of the limitations of those models, because there could be errors in the labeled data. So that is, if within the system, a picture that represents a car has been labeled as a plane, and you ask the system for a plane, it will give you a car. So there can be errors in the label data. There are gaps in its training as well. So it's very important to have in mind that the system is limited. And it's not solely limited in terms of technical limitations, which is what I've just pointed towards. It also has limitations because it has this potential to harm. And I think it's very important to take this into account if we are to actually embrace this paradigm shift that Web3 could be. The potential to harm individuals or affected groups is notably by reinforcing stereotypes, by erasing individuals, by erasing groups, by denigrating them or treating them with indignity. I'll give you some examples. There are plenty, but I do wish to discuss with you if we have like 5 minutes at the end of this discussion. So I'll give you some examples of assumptions that are reproduced by the system. It does overrepresent generations of people that are female passing for some job occupation, or male passing also for other job occupations. So if you do ask the system to represent a builder, you will have images of male passing persons. If you ask the system to represent a flight attendant, you will have images of female passing persons. So there's this. There's also what I mentioned before in terms of erasure of certain groups or of certain individuals, because the system does overrepresents as well persons with lighter skin tone, or due to its potential to harm, notably by generating what we call legally explicit content. Some images are not cannot be reproduced. So certain experiences, for instance, if you're sick, if you've been in the hospital, if you're a person with disabilities, some experiences have a less chance of being represented. So those are just examples of limitations of this particular image generation system. When we take into account the added capabilities of that system, which I mentioned before, so which are variations, you know, the kiss of Klimt, and then you can do dozens of variations of the kiss. So when you take into account variations, and when you also take into account what is called in painting, so you know, taking a picture and then adding something realistically to it, or just editing it, but very realistically. You also have other pathways, other possibilities to harm, to reproduce, bias, stereotypes at scale. So here, the questions are always, okay, what is the model? What does it do? How do we wish to deploy it? Because OpenAI has really thought ahead how exactly they could deploy DALL-E, and they did not release it for the world to use. How do we wish to deploy it? And which harms are there? Which can be avoided? Which cannot? Which harms do we measure? And those that cannot be avoided, how do we mitigate them? How do we minimize the risk? So taking all of those limitations into account, taking this potential harm into account, I think it's best to have in mind that by taking some tools that exist, and I can create a lot as well, obviously, that's not the point. It's also best to have their limitations in mind. What it means for the Web3 is that, you know, we could think of using image generation models for NFT creations, for profile pictures, avatars, or even, and that's what I mentioned earlier, for, you know, creating land, creating environments, entire environments, notably in the metaverse. So we could create landscapes based on landscapes images that exist, or ask for landscapes that have never been existent before to be created via such systems. So it has this potential to be used to generate not only images, but also entire multimodal experience or worlds. So based on the limitations that we have seen, or in general, I would say, when wanting to align what's work with the paradigm shift that does represent Web3, plus wanting to use this this potential for creativity that also does represent image generation models, it's also important to have those limitations in mind in order to do things differently, and in order to actually align the promise of Web3 with what we actually do. So one key example that I could just like throw up in the air, obviously, I do not have solutions. I only have questions that one can have in mind for all stages of creating and design new places, whether it's at the stage of ideation, or at the stage of team formation, or whether it's at the stage of pitching and thinking the project. What does the project do? To whom? How do we deploy it? Etc. etc. So I leave you with this. examples that I really like of publication methods in AI ethics research. A few years ago, there was absolutely no requirements as to how exactly ethical considerations could be taken into account by researchers. And I think there was a momentum 4 years ago. And as of now, the major ML, machine learning, deep learning conferences, research conferences, do ask their participants if they wish to be published, to take into account not only the ethical considerations of the project, but also analyze their potential unintended consequences, and suggest as well risk mitigation strategies. So a first step to do things differently could be, whenever you use the tools that we have to create new ones, to think ahead of the potential harm that the project per se could embed. So my point here, and I would be happy to take any questions because there's a lot to deep dive into at many stages. My point here is that it's great, obviously, to have in mind the capabilities of the model, and those should be taken into account. But it's best to also take into account the larger context in which these images can be used or shared, and to do this, in the present times and also in the future, because it needs to be a flexible approach. I told you at the very beginning that image generation models could be used to create worlds, and as of now, we don't know for sure how exactly, what exactly the consequences will be. So based on this recognition, this humility of, we don't know exactly what all the consequences are going to be, but based on the knowledge that some consequences are known, some consequences have been attached to existing systems, to existing technologies. There are fields out there that are specialized into centering lived experiences of affected communities to actually imagine globally a future that works for everyone. So yes, I will leave you with this. I will leave you with the possibility to imagine further, and based on a given understanding of how social hierarchies work, based on an understanding of how the relationship between language and power works, and just with this, with this plea that there's so many people out there that would be thrilled to work with you, so that you can also interrogate your work and enrich it with ways to render it less harmful, to whom, in what ways, and just do it better. Voila. That's what I can give you. That's obviously a very brief introduction on image generation models, on the types of harm that we have highlighted when it comes to AI ethics. And then, I'm also very eager to learn about your projects and see what we can do, in the Web3. That's a very bright future we could build together. Voila. If you have any questions, I would be happy to take them. I'm unsure how you can ask them, but I would be here for it.
Thank you so much, Imane. I think I will, we'll step in terms of questions. We have to wrap it up, unfortunately, very soon. But nonetheless, I do think that this will spark a couple of follow-up conversations, in particular with artists. Also, I do think that we might might want to workshop this in a different forum, because I find this conversation and its implications for complex technological systems, or as I was earlier, when maybe you have not been tuning in yet, been describing, Web3 as a techno-social space, because it never can, the technology can never live outside, its social context, and certain things are just impossible to achieve certain neutralities of technology. There's a couple of conversations in Web3 about credible neutrality. What does that look like? Is that even possible from a ethics point of view, from a legal point of view? So there is quite a few questions that need to be addressed and don't get addressed enough, in my opinion, in Web3 in particular. But I'm wondering, you've been talking about guiding principles, and since we do have quite a few builders here that try to build projects that they want to be equitable, that want to be driven by agency, but very often, certain experiences and knowledges or ideas are missing in the process. You can't build anything taking something into account that you don't know of. What would be like your AI ethics quick guide to building with accountability, with ethical accountability? Like, are there any pointers? And even if it's a book that you would say that like is incredibly insightful when it comes to these things.
Okay. I would say at the stage of ideation and team formation, it can be very insightful to look for other skills than solely tech related skills, and look for ethical, philosophical experts. I would also say that it's very difficult to know what one cannot know. So as well, I would, interrogate the technology per se and try to see exactly what the consequences could be. And then to give an idea of, one resource that I find very useful to get started into AI ethics, I feel like the podcast called Radical AI is a very good place to start. Yes, I think it's a good place to start. Radical AI podcast.
Okay, most certainly will put that onto my pile of things I want to know. I mean, there's also, like we could get into very, very in-depth conversations also about ideas of ethics. There's of course like schools of philosophy. What does like an ethic look like that is rooted in like cosmological principles of knowledge formation? You could get very, very deep. Unfortunately, we do not have the time for this. But Imane Bello, please follow her on Twitter. As I understand, you just started your Web3 journey more or less currently.
Yes.
So I know we will see much more of you in our space. This was just an intro to this weird and wonderful world that is our community around DAOs and Zora. And I can't wait to have another in-depth conversation with you.
Me as well. Thank you for having me.
Enjoy your trip, your holiday.
Yes.
Have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. See you soon. Take care.
See you soon. Bye-bye.